What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Pack-A-Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Hope you enjoyed the very first game of the NFL season. Wasn't a super entertaining game. 10-10 at halftime at least kept things a little bit close, but in the second half, the Bills completely took over in an incredibly impressive display. Had it not been for some Bills turnovers early in that game, they would have completely boat raced the Rams, and in the end, they did by 3 touchdowns really anyway. So massively impressive game from the Bills. They're going to be an incredible football team this upcoming season. I'm sure the Rams will bounce back and they'll be good, but that was certainly an eye-opening loss following a Super Bowl win just a season ago. So fun, mostly entertaining, at least first half of that game, but it was just really great to get football back. And even if the Bills won by 3 touchdowns, it was still football, and I will take that every single day of the week. So that was great. And then always, I think sometimes it gets underplayed, but you always want to see the AFC team beat the NFC team. That's just one less win in your conference, especially for a team like the Rams, who will be competing probably for a number 1, number 2 seed. And again, anytime you can have less wins in your conference, that's a win overall, and just a better opportunity for you as a team, for the Packers to go out and pick up wins, hopefully against the AFC. And hopefully, that could potentially set the Packers apart when, you get to tiebreakers and things like that towards the end of the season. So you always love to see the NFC teams lose to the AFC, and that's a great way to start with the Rams losing to the Bills. Before we jump into other topics today, I did want to finalize my last announcement. If you missed yesterday, first few announcements, Tyler Herrick is going to be doing a ton of social media work for Pack-A-Day. In addition, Mike Wall is going to be back on Fridays this upcoming season, so super excited about that. And then I also announced that starting today, as you're listening to this on Friday, 4:30 p.m. Central Standard Time, I'm going to be doing a Packers Happy Hour live on YouTube. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions. I'm going to be joined by Perry Goldstein, Maggie Loney, and Dusty Evely for the very first episode today at 4:30 p.m. Central Time. My last announcement is that I'm also going to be doing Pack-A-Day Live 7 p.m. every single Tuesday with some incredible guests, and I am kicking things off this upcoming Tuesday with Aaron Nagler and Ben Fennell. So should be a phenomenal episode, and I'm going to line up some absolutely amazing guests around the Packers sphere this upcoming season. So if there's somebody you would like to see on, definitely comment below and I'll see what I can do and do my best to have nothing but the absolute best of the best when it comes to breaking down the Packers this upcoming season. But super excited to announce 7 p.m. Tuesdays, Central Standard Time on YouTube, Pack-A-Day Podcast Live with, again, this coming Tuesday, special guests Aaron Nagler and Ben Fennell. So make sure to check that out and make sure to subscribe if you have not already, and make sure to set your alarms 4:30 p.m. Central Time today for Pack-A-Day Happy Hour. Now, back to the task at hand and talking about the Green Bay Packers. We got an update to the injury report, a semi-update. So the only update in actual status was Mercedes Lewis, who just had a veteran rest day. So no real update there. However, we did get great news that both Elton, Jenkins, and David Baktiari would be participating and did participate in team drills on Thursday. So that is a huge potential step in the right direction for both of those players. Whether or not they play on Sunday will still remain to be seen. Matt LaFleur did get asked the question of, if the turf and if the fake field in Minnesota would potentially change his mind, or at least factor into the decision of playing Jenkins and Baktiari on Sunday, and he said no. So this is going to be totally dependent upon how they feel and if they're ready to go, and if the doctors feel comfortable and ready to clear them. And if so, Jenkins and Baktiari will be playing on Sunday, and if not, they will not be. So still a major storyline as to whether or not those two offensive line specialists will go this upcoming week. And if they don't, that's going to certainly make things a lot more challenging. So the unknown is definitely alive and well, and we just don't know what's going to happen. But the fact that both participated in team drills is certainly a good sign, if not for this Sunday, definitely moving forward. So you love to see that. In addition, not so great news, Alan Lazard continued to not practice, and it's probably going to come down to Friday and whether or not he can go on Friday and practice on Friday. If he can't, that's usually an indicator that the player will not play on Sunday. Not 1,000,000% always the case, but I'd say we're in the 90 percentile of if you don't practice Friday, you don't play Sunday. So that will definitely be something to keep an eye on Sunday or on Friday. and hopefully he's able to go, and hopefully he's able to play on Sunday. But, if he's not, that's going to change things quite a bit. And I know they have great depth at wide receiver: Sammy Watkins, Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson, Randall Cobb, Amari Rodgers, maybe even Juwan Winfrey call up from the practice squad. We could see a variety of wide receivers in there, but for a team that's already lost Devontae Adams in the offseason, potentially losing their next weapon in Alan Lazard for the first game on the road in Minnesota, the player that really Aaron probably felt the most comfortable with, I think that's going to change things quite a bit. So definitely will be worth keeping an eye on the injury report on Friday to see what Alan Lazard is listed as, and B, to see if he ultimately practiced on Friday or not. So we will keep an eye on all of those things, and I will keep you posted here on the Pack-A-Day podcast. So again, make sure to subscribe if you have not already. All right. The next up, and what my main topic for today is sort of the state of the Minnesota Vikings and what's gone on this offseason. Now, I know there are some of you who will tell me that this is a Packers podcast or Packers videocast, whatever you want to call it, Packers show, and we should be focusing on the Green Bay Packers. Well, I do that about 360 days a year, and every once in a while, I do think it's important to cover specifically the division teams, the Chicago Bears, the Detroit Lions, and the Minnesota Vikings, because while we want to keep our friends close, there is it is advantageous sometimes to keep your enemies closer. And I think it's worth taking a look at really the state of this Minnesota Vikings franchise, what they've done in the offseason, because there were some significant moves that were made, and what level threat they are to the Green Bay Packers, both currently and in the future. So let's start off with what the Vikings did this offseason. First and foremost, and most importantly, really, they let go of Rick Spielman, general manager, Mike Zimmer, head coach, and really the entirety of their staff and front office. So a completely new regime change in Minnesota. They hired, I'm going to butcher the name, I'm sure, but Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah as their new general manager. They hired Kevin O'Connell as head coach, Ed Donatel, former Packers defensive coordinator, as their defensive coordinator, and have moved to a 3-4 defense, which is a significant move for the Vikings. And then they hired Wes Phillips as their offensive coordinator. So a ton of moves, and then, of course, a full coaching staff, including former Packers coaches Mike Smith and Mike Pettin as well. So a very experienced I would say assistant coaching staff with guys like Mike Smith and Mike Pettin, but Kevin O'Connell, first head coaching job. Obviously, Adolfo-Mensah, first time as a general manager. Wes Phillips, first time as an offensive coordinator. And then Ed Donatel, really a guy that's been around for a very long time, again, including with the Green Bay Packers as their experienced defensive coordinator. So the first thing that they needed to decide as a franchise, you bring in a new front office entirely, a new head coaching staff. You have two, options at that point. And we saw it really with Brian Gutekunst and Matt LaFleur, right? I know Gutekunst was sort of first, and then Matt LaFleur was the next year after that. But they had an opportunity to maybe say, hey, we're going to do a rebuild. And Green Bay decided, no, we've got Aaron Rodgers. We're going to go all in, and we're going to sign a bunch of free agents, including Za'Darius and Preston and Amos and Billy Turner. And they've continued to restack this team over and over and decide that they wanted to go for the win. The Minnesota Vikings had that same option. So did the Chicago Bears, who I'm sure we'll talk about next week as well. The Packers at the time, when they, sort of had a new regime, decided they wanted to continue to try to win. The Bears, with their front office, decided, hey, we're not trying to win right now. We've got a very young and crappy football team. It's probably better for us to lose games, get better draft picks, and sort of reshape this roster as time goes on. Minnesota Vikings decided they were going to keep things status quo, and they were going to try to win right now. And I have made no bones about it. I've mentioned it on here multiple times. I thought this was a mistake. I thought the Chicago Bears did the smart thing, especially when Aaron Rodgers decided he was going to come back and sign the contract and play for the Packers. The Bears, in my opinion, are of the right mind in saying, hey, we can't win right now. We're not going to compete with Aaron Rodgers and the Packers right now. Let's start building for 2, 3, 4 years from now when Rodgers is gone and this division is up for grabs. We want to be really good then. That makes sense to me. In the meantime, they can get a ton of great draft picks. And while I'm not cheering for the Bears to succeed, I thought they made the right decision. The Minnesota Vikings were in a bit of no man's land because they've got the weirdo Kirk Cousins contract. They've got some really good win-now players in Dalvin Cook and Justin Jefferson. And they've got some players on defense in, Danielle Hunter and Eric Kendricks and Harrison Smith and Patrick Peterson, who are sort of win-now players who are not getting any younger. So you've got the Adam Thielen, same thing on offense, right? So you've got this interesting structure where you have a bunch of basically win now players. You don't really have great youth on the team outside of Justin Jefferson. I'm thinking off the top of my head, and I don't think I'm wrong here. I think Justin Jefferson, they've got a couple young, defensive backs in Cam Dantzler and Andrew Booth, Cam Bynum, a good guard, and Ed Ingram. But if you look at like the long term of this team, Darisaw, Ezra Cleveland, certainly some good offensive linemen. But for like high-end talent, for like young guys, it's basically Justin Jefferson. That's the guy that you'd build off of, but he's ready right now as well. So it's not like they have a ton of youth that they can sort of build towards that next window, but they're also in this spot where they have a lot of these win now guys, but the win now guys that they have are probably not quite good enough, and they didn't really have a ton of money to go out and spend to sort of try to add on and make this team better because they're paying Kirk Cousins a ridiculous amount of money. So the first thing they had to decide though is, do you stick status quo? Do you go all in? Or do you start the rebuild? And they basically decided to go status quo. And in doing so, they restructured Kirk Cousins, putting that monstrous contract into this season and even more into the future as well. They reworked Danielle Hunter. They reworked Adam Thielen to open up some more space to try to keep this team together. They re-signed Patrick Peterson. They re-signed Sean Mannion, who's now no longer with the team. They re-signed Jordan Berry, who's now no longer with the team. And then they really let go of some guys as well. They let go Mackenzie Alexander, Anthony Barr, Everson Griffin, Michael Pierce, Sheldon Richardson, Xavier Woods. Some of those guys were in sort of that win now phase, but they decided to move on in some cost saving measures. And then there were some other players, lesser known. Probably the most of this group would be Tyler Conklin, but Mason Cole, Dakota Dozier, Chris Herndon, Rashad Hill, and Nick Vigil, some other players that were no longer on the team. But with that came the ability to sign some free agents as well. And they did that by really sort of more often than not bolstering their defense. Harrison Phillips, big defensive lineman signing, 3 years, $19.5 million with $8.45 million guaranteed. Zadarius Smith, who you all know about and has been in the news this week, 3 years, $42 million with only $6.45 million guaranteed though. It's basically a 1-year deal. Jordan Hicks, 2 years, $10 million, $4.45 million guaranteed. Jesse Davis, a 1-year, $3 million deal, almost all guaranteed. He was since traded to the Steelers. Then they signed Albert Wilson, who was released, Jonathan Bullard, Austin Schlottman, Chandon Sullivan, who you know very well, and then Chris Reed as a guard as well. So those were their free agency additions. And then, of course, they had the draft as well. They trade down in the draft in a very interesting trade. They end up with Lewis Cine at pick number 32, safety out of Georgia. Andrew Booth, the corner from Clemson, in the second round, as well as Ed Ingram, the guard from LSU, in the second round. Then they get Brian Asamoah, the linebacker, in the third round. Caleb Evans, the corner from Missouri, in the fourth. Ezeki Atemwo, a defensive end or edge player out of the University of Minnesota, in the fifth round. Ty Chandler, the running back, in the sixth round. Vidarian Lowe, a tackle, in the sixth round. Jalen Naylor, a wide receiver, in the sixth round. And then Nick Muse, a tight end out of South Carolina, in the seventh round, who is now on the practice squad. All of their other draft picks, not named Nick Muse, did make the initial 53-man roster. As far as starters from that rookie group, Ed Ingram seems to be their starting guard. Everyone else is going to have to fight a little bit for positioning. Andrew Booth, probably like their number 4-ish corner. Lewis Cine is their number 3 safety right now, behind Harrison Smith and Cam Bynum. So the rest of the group mostly in backup and special teams roles. So doesn't seem like they're going to get a major boost from this rookie class outside of maybe Ed Ingram as a starter at guard. And then after all of that was done, they did just recently trade for Jalen Reagor, the wide receiver from TCU, who most recently played for the Eagles. They did recently trade for him as well to add some depth to their wide receiver group. So where does that leave them today? So I'm not going to go through their full 53-man roster. I don't think anyone really wants to do that. But here's sort of their lineup as I see it. So, of course, Kirk Cousins at quarterback. Then you've got Dalvin Cook and then Madison and then Gwangwu, who I really like as a number 3 running back. They've got a really good stable of running backs. Wide receiver, they've got Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, KJ Osborne, and Jalen Reagor. Tight end is Irv Smith Jr. And then an offensive line that I think is the best since they've really had Kirk Cousins in Minnesota. I think this has the ability to be a very good O-line with Christian Darisaw at left tackle, Ezra Cleveland at left guard, Garrett Bradbury at center, Ed Ingram at right guard, and then Brian O'Neill at right tackle. O'Neill and Darisaw especially, I think, have the ability to be a pretty darn good tackle duo. I think Cleveland's really coming along as a starting left guard. We'll see what Ingram can do as a rookie second rounder. I think Bradbury is a rookie, and Ingram as the rookie. Bradbury is probably the weak link there, is where you really need to attack. We'll talk about that in our matchups probably on tomorrow's show. But I do think this is a pretty good offense that has a lot of experience playing together. And now you get a new offensive mind in Kevin O'Connell using that Sean McVay style offense. And I do think this is going to be a pretty tough offense to stop this season. They're very familiar with one another. They've played together. They're going to have some unscouted looks from Kevin O'Connell. And I think it's a very good offensive line as well. So I think they've done a good job of keeping this offense together. On the defensive side of the ball, you've got a 3-4 defense on the defensive line. Jonathan Bullard, Harrison Phillips, and Dalvin Tomlinson. Phillips and Tomlinson are going to make things tough to run inside. Jonathan Bullard, not a huge fan of, and he is on the Vikings injury report as limited right now. But I think Phillips and Dalvin Tomlinson are going to make things tough inside. Then you've got Danielle Hunter and Zadarius Smith as your edge rushers. Hunter will transition into a stand-up outside linebacker, so that'll be a little bit new for him. But of course, Zadarius Smith, they're going to be able to move all around and attack whatever weak offensive lineman that the opposing team has. Kendricks and Hicks are going to provide good speed at inside linebacker. You've got Patrick Peterson, the veteran at corner, along with Cam Dantzler, who, while not the fleetest of foot, is a pretty darn good press cover corner. Chandon Sullivan in the slot, and then second-round pick Andrew Booth. At safety, they got Harrison Smith, Cam Bynum, and then probably Harrison Smith's long-term replacement in Lewis Seen. Kicker Greg Joseph, punter Ryan Wright, and then they've got a really good kick returner, as I mentioned, in Kene Nwangwu, and then punt returner Jalen Reagor, who has a punt return for a touchdown against the Packers on his career resume as well. So overall, I like this team. I do think they're a very talented team, and I think they are going to be one of the better teams in the NFC. Now, that being said, this, as always, is going to come down to Kirk Cousins, because I think they've got good weapons. I think they've got a good offensive line. I think they're going to be able to run the football. I think they're going to be able to stop the run inside with guys like Phillips and Tomlinson and the overall depth along the defensive line. Eric Kendricks at linebacker. I think that's going to be a pretty good front. I think they're going to be able to get some pressure with Z and Danielle Hunter. I think they're going to be okay in the secondary. I think that's an area where you can attack. But overall, I think it's a good team. But if Kirk Cousins is the same quarterback that we've seen for basically ever now, there's just a ceiling to what I think this team can ultimately become. And I'll talk about more on that in just a moment. The other thing is the health of Zadarius Smith and Danielle Hunter. These are two players who've been pretty banged up over the course of the last few seasons. And while it's unfortunate that the Packers have to face them in week 1 when both of those guys are 100% healthy, the big question is going to be when you get into weeks 10, 11, 12, how healthy are those two? And if they are not healthy, you're putting a lot of your edge rush hope and faith into two players who are older in their careers and have had a lot of injury issues. I don't think those two are going to be able to stay completely healthy and together through the course of the season, and that could change the Vikings' trajectory quite a bit as well. So where I come down on this Minnesota Vikings team, I absolutely think they're a playoff team. If you told me they beat Green Bay week 1, I wouldn't be shocked. If you told me they won the division, I wouldn't be totally shocked. But where Minnesota is at right now is they're some form of probable playoff team who, if a couple things go wrong, are out of the playoffs. If a couple things go right in their way, I still think, I don't know, their ceiling at best is probably an NFC Championship loss. I just don't think that they can, get to the promised land with the roster constructed as it is. So listen, if you're a good playoff team, I can understand the want and the desire to keep the team together, especially when you've got some pretty good talent like a Justin Jefferson, like a Dalvin Cook, a good offensive line, some good edge rushers if they can stay healthy. Like, I can understand the desire to do that. It's just probably not what I would have done. And they were in no man's land with the Kirk Cousins contract, and with some of these older players, you're not going to get a return on investment if you start trying to trade, Harrison Smith or Eric Kendricks, Danielle Hunter at this point in their career. So it almost is better to just go out and hope for the best with those guys. But I see this as a likely number 6, number 7 wildcard team, number 2 team in the NFC North. not really a threat overall, I don't think, to the Packers, at least in like the playoffs in that way. Again, it's not to say that they couldn't outbeat the Packers in the North. It's not to say that they couldn't beat the Packers in a playoff game. But if you told me a team from the NFC North won the Super Bowl, I would bet heavily that it was the Packers and that it wasn't the Minnesota Vikings. I just don't think they have that type of ceiling overall. So good football team. A team that I think will test the Packers, could even beat the Packers a time or two. But I think the Packers are the overall better team. I think they have a more well-constructed roster. I think they have a better ceiling with a real opportunity to win the Super Bowl. And I think the Vikings are, again, overall caught in this no man's land where they can be a good football team. I don't think they can be great. And that just gets you in that, 10-7 area with a, 24th overall pick every year. And you're just sort of caught in mediocrity. And I think that's where Minnesota is. And while Detroit is still in a firm rebuild mode to a point where I think they're almost too good without the quarterback yet, which is concerning because you need usually one of those top picks to get one of those top quarterbacks. So I think they're in an interesting spot. The Bears, you don't know what Justin Fields is going to be. And if they're really terrible, they'll probably get another quarterback early next year. But I think the Bears played it more right where they're saying, hey, why compete with Aaron Rodgers now? We can compete in a few years when Aaron Rodgers isn't there. And the Vikings decided, hey, we want to compete with the Packers right now, and we think we can be the better team. I don't think they can be. They think they can. We'll see who's ultimately right. It's going to be a really fun opening game on the road in Minnesota, a place where the Packers lost a season ago. But Justin Jefferson tore the Packers apart that game, and the Packers didn't have Jair Alexander. They will have him this week, and that is going to be a huge addition for the Packers defense and a huge way to hopefully keep this Vikings offense under wraps. That's going to do it for me. Before I forget, make sure you check out Happy Hour today, 4:30 p.m. Central Time. Dusty Evely, Perry Goldstein, Maggie Loney, and myself. Around a couple beers, not Maggie for obvious reasons, but a couple beers, chatting some Green Bay Packers. We'll have some opportunity for questions. So 4:30 Central here on YouTube. Make sure to check it out. I'll also be right back here tomorrow with another all-new episode, breaking down Packers, Vikings, key matchups, things like that, going over the injury report, etc. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.